Hello and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and round 10 of the AFL season was one for the highlights reel. I can't remember a round with so many huge marks and amazing goals. The first half of the Lions-Cats game on Thursday alone had several shouts for goal of the year, with the two Camerons lighting up the Gabba in Charlie and Jezza. Then there was Jordan Dawson's long run and finish, and two special snaps from Josh Rochelle as the Crows found their mojo. And Port Adelaide's Ewan McKinley broke a tackle, took two bounces, and roosted one from just inside 50 up in Darwin on Friday night. Then there were the marks. Aaron Norton's one-handed juggle, Ollie Henry's specky in the forward pocket, and Charlie Curno's massive hang, although I'm not really sure he held it all the way down. But it was a great round of footy with plenty of highlights, and I was very happy to be watching it again. Apologies, there was no episode last week. I was busy moving house, didn't watch much footy, and didn't even have internet at that point. So, first time we haven't had an episode. I'll make sure it's the only time. Well, as much as I can control anyway. So fantasy-wise, round 10 was pretty high scoring at the top end, but most sides seemed to have a more even spread of scorers. No side had more than 3 players score a ton, except for the Saints, who had 7 salute against the Tigers. At the very top, Brodie Grundy top scored with 161 against the depleted Collingwood ruckline, and Bailey Smith continues his incredible scoring run with a 157, giving him 7 scores over 120 from his 10 games this season. In fact, since joining Geelong, he is now averaging 120 from his 29 fantasy games. So excluding opening rounds and finals, that's an average of 120 in 29 games. Astounding. For me personally, as I said, I was able to watch
info about analog science fiction and fact.
Siri, please. That was Siri giving me information about a book called Astounding. I don't know why Siri does that. I didn't beckon her. Anyway, let's get back to what I was talking about. So for me, over the weekend, I was able to watch more footy, watch plenty actually, much more than the week before. And, had some really good results across my leagues. My home league, Finders Keepers, I was a bit worried I might have just missed my chance at finals. I was a couple of games out of that spot, but I've won a couple now and I'm back in the mix. So, never write off your season too early, that's for sure. My classic season remains in the toilet, and that is where it shall stay, I reckon. Alrighty, on to the podcast. And this week on Finders Keepers, I will go through my waiver picks straight off the bat. I'll jump into the things I noticed across round 10, and then I'll finish with a question from a good fan of the pod who's sent something in, a trade for me to review. So because it's been 2 weeks since the last episode, I'm not going to review the players I suggested a fortnight ago, just because, things move so quickly. So I will just stick with giving you 3 names I recommend for your waivers for a regular league, and then I'll give you 3 for deeper leagues. And then, that's all I've got this week. It's really getting to that point of the year. What are we, round 10, where the waiver pool is starting to dry up a little bit. Players are popping still here and there, but I struggled to find any sort of obvious ones. But this is what I've got. Number 1, Shannon Neal is still only owned by 60% of Keeper and Dynasty leagues on the Keeper fantasy platform. And I understand why some may have let him go. But I think we all know there's something pretty special with this guy. I think for a long time we were just waiting for Tom Hawkins to retire. And it's been a couple of years since, and he's starting to just show signs of dominating. And maybe it's a case of Jeremy Cameron retiring for Neal to really hit his straps. Anyway, he was fantastic on the weekend. He scored 88. He's actually averaging 87 in his last 3. And as I said, only 60% ownership. There's a forward I'd be grabbing for sure. Number 2 is the second-year son, Leo Lombard. And I've only got him here because his ownership has just dipped under the 70% mark. It's at 68 now. And I reckon a lot of people might have just dropped him in recent weeks, just with those lower scores. It's hard to hold a player like that, depending on your league, obviously. But he's been pretty good the last few weeks. Got 62 on the weekend. And I just think with that forward status, he's definitely worth grabbing. You know, you're probably going to be hesitant to field him, but he's definitely worth a stash. I love that he's playing pretty much every game now in what is a top 4 side, and I think he's building very nicely. And then number 3, now this one is very much dependent on the injury report, which at time of recording I haven't seen any news, but Isaac Cumming for Adelaide. Now when he came across from the Giants to Adelaide, I thought he'd end up at a half-back role, which would be very nice for his scoring, as we saw throughout sporadic years at the Giants. But he's been on the wing ever since he's joined the Crows. In this game, he went to the half-back role and looked pretty good. He scored 65, but that was from only 52% time on ground because he went off with hamstring concern. Now, at 60% ownership and mid-only, it's pretty understandable. Not many people would be too excited by Isaac Cumming at the moment. But if this halfback role continues, and assuming his hamstring's fine, the halfback role for him is very fruitful. And I reckon grabbing him now before another week of seeing it would be smart. But again, if he's out with a hamstring, you can just probably forget that. Onto the deeper leagues, a few names I reckon worth having a look at. Number 1 is James Trezise for Richmond. He's 23 years old. This is his 4th season. Only owned in 24% of leagues, has defender status. Scored 108 on the weekend, and that was from 11 marks. And I reckon there's a chance he got a bit of a bump in role and scoring with Tom Brown out of the side. So not only have they lost Sam Banks, they've now lost Tom Brown. I think Trezise picked up a bit of that halfback sort of role. So he scored 108, and even the last couple of weeks, 74 and 84. So he's building, and job security is good because, you know, half of Richmond's list is injured, unfortunately. And yeah, I think that role's there for him for the time being. So I think he's definitely worth a shout. Number 2 is Billy Wilson for Carlton. Now, question is, was his 78 on the weekend the result of the new coach bump? And can we expect it to continue? Or was it just one out of the box? And a lot of the Carlton boys scored pretty well in this game. But Billy Wilson, second year, 20 years old, and owned by 18% of coaches in keeper and dynasty leagues. Now, I was looking into him, and he actually scored 85 in the last round last year. So this isn't his first sort of good score that he's put up. And, you know, most leagues will probably have another look this week first. But if you're in a deep league, you're looking for a defender, get on Billy Wilson. Or my third option, also at Carlton, Matt Carroll had a real breakout game. He scored a 96. Did take him 3 goals to get to that 96, but playing off the wing, he looked really good in this game. He's also 20 and in his second season, owned in 29% of leagues, and he's got defender mid status. So, yeah, his scoring is, you know, he can drop a really putrid one on you, but I don't know. He was pretty exciting in this game. So maybe he's worth a crack as well. Anyway, they're my waiver picks. Not really all that flash. And I think it's probably a good week to remind you or to talk about the importance of not burning a waiver pick. You know, depending on how your league's set up, the waiver order could just be reverse ladder every week, in which case you get a pick every week. You may as well have a crack. But there's 2 reasons to just hold fire unless you really want to have a look at someone. One would be if your waivers aren't reverse ladder, they are rolling every week. So if you have pick 1 and you use it, you drop to the back of the line. So smart coaches will just, if you've got a decent pick and there's no players you're in love with, just sit on it and don't burn that early priority pick. The other reason, and I'm very guilty of this in my keeper leagues, is by just constantly jumping on someone, you're dropping someone every week. And I feel like I drop players a little too quickly. I'll get excited. I'll talk about them on the waiver picks on the podcast. I'll grab them and then they score 50 and I say, all right, I'll try someone else. But the patient coach and the one who backs in their judgment will just sit on that player for a few weeks, because what you saw that made you jump on them may not be there the next week, but it's obviously there and you'll see it. So yeah, I think this is probably a good week unless you've got someone you definitely want to drop and you're not burning a waiver pick. Maybe it's the week to just sit it out. But if not, there's 6 names for you. All right, let's get stuck into the things that I noticed across round 10. And there was some juicy stuff this weekend. Looking forward to getting into it. Starting with Thursday night, Brisbane and Geelong. The grand final replay in that first half, as I said, was just so enthralling. So many highlights and tight game. And then Geelong went bang in the second half. Absolutely put them to the sword. Big result there for the Catters. For Brisbane, I just want to talk about Bruce Reville. Now, he only scored a 60, not exactly an attention-grabbing score. But I swear, every time I watch Brisbane, I notice him. There's something about him that is building towards being a fantasy player for us. Just playing on the wing, it's not like he's on the ball or, racking it up off half-back. He's just in every contest. And I think he gets around the ground. He must have a great engine because he's just up and down, up and down. Anyway, keep an eye on him. I reckon he's building towards being a very handy player for us. And Brisbane as well, just quietly. For the Cats, it was a really big night for Geelong. Obviously, the result was big. And Tanner Bruhn scored a 91. And he's played in so many different spots this year, but he was back into the centre ball up mix this week with Warple out of the side. And he had 29 touches. His disposal can let him down at times, but the way he hunts the ball and the way he presents at every contest and is always in the spot to receive, I don't know, Geelong, just stick with him in one spot. I mean, I would have preferred to see him at half-back in this game because he's so close to getting that DPP threshold for the next round of changes for the standard DPPs. But when he plays on the ball, he looks unreal. So, yeah, not sure what's happening with the Warple injury, but I'd say Bruhn will stay in that role. Although, who knows? He could be at half-forward next week. You never know. Ocean Mullen. He scored 89. He's starting to become more than just, well, let's face it, the best tagger in the game. We've seen that in the last couple of years, and it's pretty fair to say that about him. But he's starting to become more attacking and impactful. Now, he scored an 89. I think he pretty much got up to that big, decent score with a lot of tackles, maybe 8 or 9 tackles. But he's getting involved in scoring chains, goal assists. I think he kicked one on the weekend. Just starting to see a bit of a shift in this player. And he was still doing a shutdown role, Lachie Neale, at the same time. So it made me think of going back a while, but Cameron Ling was such a good tagger, but he also was a brilliant ball winner. Kane Cornes, the same thing. They're pretty lofty standards to be comparing young Mullen to, but just something I'm going to watch the next few weeks if he can start to turn it. Both Jack Steele was a good example. He was a tagger when he got to the Saints and then eventually became a ball winner himself. Shannon Neale, spoke about him earlier, just that hot form continues. He had a big game. So did Sean Manor, 129. Absolutely tore this game to shreds. 5 goals and 30 touches, playing half forward in a very welcome return to form for his owners. Unreal. Friday night we had another double header, starting with Sydney and Collingwood, and this was a great game of footy as well. Sydney just got up in the end, and Collingwood were pretty brave, I thought. For Sydney, Nick Blakey put up a career-high fantasy score of 146 thanks to 39 touches, and I think it was 10 marks. And this is obviously, a bit out of the box in terms of the ceiling of his scoring, but he's been pretty underrated, I reckon, Blakey, the last few years. A lot of talk about how good he is, at actual footy and that amazing drive he gives the Swans off half-back. But fantasy, he's been super consistent in the last few years, and he takes so many kick-ins, and now we know he can pretty much hit a 150. Very nice. Justin McInerney put up his second ton of the season with a 110, but he is actually, at the moment, the fifth highest averaging forward with 94. He had 83% CBAs this week, which was the highest of the season. And I think for a while I thought he was just sort of helping out in the midfield. No, he's a midfielder now, and he's thriving. A real breakout for him. For Collingwood, really, really sad. For Oscar Steen, it's such a cruel game sometimes. Darcy Cameron out of the side. Here's Steen's opportunity to be the number one, and he's gone down with an ACL. So that's him done for 12 months. You would know from his first game how big I've been on him. Absolutely loved watching him. So that is a shame. Hopefully he comes back bigger and stronger in 2027. Now, Jordan De Goey's on fire. He scored 86 in this game, but he's been on fire since he came back from an injury on Anzac Day. And since then, lots more midfield time and looking very much like the De Goey was sort of saw in spurts in the last few years in between all the injuries. He's averaging 94 in his last three playing in the midfield, and in this game he attended 96% of the CBAs. So that forward status makes him a very good asset, and probably not someone that many carried from year on. He was probably picked up in your redraft and wasn't looking good early, but he's firing now. The other Friday night game was Gold Coast and Port Adelaide in very hot conditions up in Darwin. And Gold Coast won this game, but I got to say, Port Adelaide really impressed me, especially that first half. They're looking really good, and their form line at the minute, the last 3-4 weeks, not winning every game, but just the way they're playing. I reckon Port Adelaide fans will be pretty excited about the start that Josh Carr's made. Anyhow, it was the Suns who prevailed, and Ned Moyle is someone I want to talk about. He scored 79 in this game, and interestingly, he was preferred to Jared Witts last week, and he was again this week. But there was a late change which saw Jared Witts come in, and Wittsy, he only played 58% game time, and Moyle spent more time forward, made himself useful, kicked 3 goals, and I think he stays in the lineup now. It's just whether he plays with Witts or without. But I think Moyle has got himself in, and we're going to see him for a decent stint. Mac Andrew scored an 85, so that's 4 weeks in a row of 90-something, a ton, and now 85. The two rucks obviously had an effect on Andrew because he didn't have any ruck minutes. Not that he's had heaps lately anyway, but he's had a little bit in the last few weeks, and every +1 counts. So he still got to his 85 thanks to a massive 50-point second quarter. So he was quiet in spurts, but overall he's really firming as a great option in the back line. Now, on the flip side, Will Powell scored a 58, and the fun midfield experiment looks to be over. He hasn't attended a centre ball up since round 6, and he did score a ton in round 8, but every other game has just been 50s and 60s playing in that defensive role. I actually think you should, if you've got him, because I've got him in a couple of leagues, and he has been very fun to have, I reckon try and get a trade. He's averaging 80, and that ton that he scored is still in the last few weeks. I reckon you could pitch a trade for someone looking for a defender and maybe get out while that average still sits above 80. For Port Adelaide, there was a debutant, Tom Anastasopoulos. I hope I got that right. He made his debut, scored 53, but I thought he brought really good energy and it was a great first game from him. He was really noticeable. I'm not sure where he was playing exactly. I think he was on the flanks, but I did see him a bit and he had a bit of a go. I reckon maybe in that first half particularly. Anyway, I just thought he played a good first game and I reckon we'll see him again next week. Now, Jason Horne-Francis has dropped right off in recent weeks after threatening to explode with back-to-back 120s in round 6 and 7. 6-7. Now, that midfield role remains. I'm just not sure why he's dropped off and he's only scoring 60s now. And, yeah, maybe I got a little too excited a few weeks ago, but we'll see. Hopefully he bounces back soon because he's an important player in a lot of my teams, including Classic. That was a terrible pickup. Anyway, Zach Butters, 122, absolutely flying. And that is now 9 consecutive weeks of 30-plus disposals for Butters. So I thought I'd look at what the record is. It's 16 games in a row, and it's held by Tuke Miller. He did it in 2021. So for Butters to match or beat that record, he needs another 7 weeks in a row of 30 plus. Here's who he's got. The Blues and the Eagles, I think that can be done. The Swans, be tough, especially if James Jordan goes to him. The Magpies, the Crows, Kangaroos, Saints, and that levels it, and then he can clear it if he does it against the Dockers. Fair way off, and I bet because I've given him a boost this week, he goes under 30 this week, but it's super impressive. 9 weeks in a row, 30 touches. On to Saturday footy, and Adelaide put North Melbourne to the sword with a big win, made with a massive second quarter, 10 goals to none, and I was pretty happy with it as a Crows man. It was good to see us have it all come together for at least a quarter. Anyway, good viewing for me. North fans are probably a little bit unhappy with it, but I don't know. It was a bad day, but they're still building nicely, I reckon. Anyway, it was a bit of a domination. The Crows had 10 of the 12 top fantasy scorers, but it was very spread out. The biggest score was a 107 to Peatling. And this scoring trend reminded me of the Crows when we were at our best last year. Big wins, dominating, but no huge fantasy scores, just everyone doing okay. Anyway, hopefully it's a sign of things to come for the Crows. So Peatling, that man I said top scored with 107. He's having a pretty solid run and a really nice second season at the Crows, playing pretty decent midfield minutes. He's averaging 98 in his last 5, and I think he's really added something to the midfield that, has needed something a bit different, and he's doing a good job there. Rory Laird scored a 94, but he broke a really impressive record on the weekend. So Lairdy is now the owner of the record of the longest streak of 15-plus disposals in a game. So the weekend was his 240th consecutive game where he's had 15 or more disposals. The previous record was held by Scott Pendlebury, which is not a surprise. And the record's Lairdy's now, which I think is pretty cool. Bit of a strange stat, but it does speak to an incredible level of consistency. And obviously he hasn't gotten injured early in any games, which is, touch wood. Isaac Rankin continues to build into the season after what was a very slow start. He scored 102 in this game. 3 weeks in a row now, he's been playing predominantly on the ball, and that has coincided with the Crows winning 3 games in a row. The unfortunate knock-on effect is for Josh Richelli owners who were revelling in his midfield role earlier in the year, watching him flourish. But unfortunately, he's made way for Rankin. And, I've seen people sort of get frustrated or confused why they're doing that. But to me, I've been very consistent. I don't think you can have both Rankin and Richelli on the ball together for long periods. I think you need one of those guys to be complemented by your in and under guys like Berry and Peatling. And then the other reason Richelli, as good as he is in the midfield, he's bloody good around goals. I mean, the 3 goals he kicked on the weekend were all fantastic, and Rankin as well. But for now, Rankin's the midfield guy, Richelli's not. It'll be a balance, and there'll be games where they switch and Richelli is the midfield guy. But right now, it's working, and I think it'll stay. Isaac Cumming, I spoke about him earlier, just looked to be used off half-back, which is something I thought we'd see last year. The heat map actually suggests he played a similar role a few weeks ago in the loss to Brisbane, and he scored 91 in that game. So, yeah, interesting. But unfortunately, he did come off with that hamstring concern, and we will just have to wait and see. Hopefully he comes good. Not really a lot to take away for North Melbourne, but Paul Curtis deserves a mention. Just continues his decent scoring form of late. He scored 79, kicked 3 of North Melbourne's 9 goals. I do think he got a few. He probably got a bit of it in that last quarter when North just sort of got some consolation goals. But he's having a good year, Curtis, and good timing, because I think owners were starting to get impatient with him, and he's starting to deliver on the promise. Later on Saturday Arvo, we saw Melbourne and Hawthorn, and Melbourne won the game with a very impressive last quarter, and they're like the feel-good story of the year so far, the D's. They lost so many of those stars out of their side, and in fact, if you look at the change from year on year, they've lost the premiership coach, Norm Smith medalist Petrarca, super mid Clayton Oliver, and even Stephen May's out of that team as well. So it's a lot of quality, but the players coming through, they're playing with just a real fun sort of attacking style. And yeah, I think D's fans will be absolutely pumped so far. Trent Rivers returned for his first game back since round 2, and he played mostly midfield, attending 65% of the centre ball-ups, scored a 75. It's not bad for a first game back. And Caleb Windsor was out, which probably played a part in why Rivers was used so much in the middle. But also the return of Jake Bowie in the back line in recent weeks. And speaking of which, that was Bowie's second game back after a very long injury layoff. Scored a 92 to go with his 98 last week, and is just taking all the kick-ins. He's gone, the last 2 weeks, he's back. He's taken 16 out of a possible 22 kick-ins for the D's. So that is definitely helping his scoring. Ed Langdon, he was moved back to the half-back line a few weeks ago now, but I didn't really notice it at first. But he's been very handy, especially with forward status. In fact, in the 5 weeks since Salem and Lindsay went out of the side injured, Ed Langdon's actually averaging 95 in that time. Pretty good. For the Hawkers, Dylan Moore with a 120, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who owns Dylan Moore wondering, where has that been all year? 27 touches, 2 goals, and his first fantasy ton of the year. And nothing really changed. It's not like he was all of a sudden, bulk midfield minutes or anything. Same role, just finally saw a bit more of what we have come used to seeing from him. So more, please. Now, the Hawthorn Rucks. I feel like I've talked about these 2 guys a lot this year. And Hawthorn, I feel, were the first side to sort of go out with the 2-ruck setup with Reeves and Meek. But I reckon for the first time all year, the Hawks probably looked a little bit top-heavy in this game. And I reckon the 2-ruck setup is going to have a rest this week. Because if you think about it, Reeves and Meek, both of them were pretty poor, at least their scoring was, from probably very little time on ground, particularly Meek. So Reeves 37, Meek 30 were their scores. But they've got a 5-day break coming into the Adelaide game in what'll be a very cold game on Thursday night down in Tassie. And I reckon they drop one of their big boys. And as a Lloyd Meek owner, I'm very concerned it's going to be him who goes out. Because even though Meek, to me, is a better player, and I think, maybe I'm biased, but I think he's looked better majority of the year. On the weekend, Reeves was used more than him, and Reeves is a better jumper, which is the type of ruckman that Adelaide has in good old McAndrew. So yeah, I'm a bit nervous that Lloyd Meek's going to be in the VFL this week, but looking at it in a more positive light, perhaps this is what we need as Meek owners. Off to the 2s, get some form in the VFL, and then wait for Reeves to have a down game and come in as the number 1 and take over again. Because really, who would have thought we'd be having these worries about him when he was flying this time last year, Lloyd Meek? Saturday night, Carlton and the Doggies. And look, Bulldogs fans, shut your ears, but I was so happy for Carlton, finally, for their fans, for the players. I felt pretty bad for Vossi because I just don't think they've been that terrible this year. They've actually been okay for large portions of most games. And I feel like they were so close to the breakout win. Probably wouldn't have saved him. But, you know, new coach came in, the caretaker Josh Fraser, and Carlton finished the game really strong and got their first win in a very long time. Jack Eisen made his debut, and I thought he was excellent. Scored 67, playing sort of half forward, a little bit through the middle, but he was just involved throughout, capped the performance with a really nice goal late, which was particularly sweet because he kicked a brilliant goal not long before that, only for, I nearly said VAR, wrong sport, the ARC, to review it and say it was touch. So Eisen lost a goal and then he got one at the end. Great debut. Matthew Carroll, this was a really big game from him, real breakout, took some big marks, kicked 3 goals off the wing. I mentioned him in my waiver wire segment. I think we've all seen little bits and pieces with Carroll, but this is the first time he's put it together in a game with a big score. And I think that's exciting. Jagger Smith saw more midfield time this week, and that gave him his highest score since round 1, a 91. And look, I know there's a lot of people who think, oh, why wasn't he played in the midfield and why did Vossi move him out? And we always look at these things with our fantasy goggles on, and a lot of people, everyone who plays Classic has this guy. And him playing less midfield meant he makes less money for your team. I get it. But this is a guy in his second season and his first actually playing after an ACL. It would be just so silly to just put him on the ball, bulk CBAs, and leave him there. You don't want to burn someone out. And I think the fact that they moved him out and they let him play half forward a bit more wasn't great for his fantasy scores, but was very good for the player. He went back into the inside this week. He looks brilliant. He's a jet. For the Doggies, look, it was a disappointing result. They are absolutely hammered by injuries, though. I think we forget that. Just with you look at sides like Richmond who are decimated, but the Doggies they've copped a lot, and this was a bad loss. But they're hanging around. The one guy I want to talk about for them was Riley Sanders. He scored 102. He just continues to show us what he can do as a midfielder. Since moving into the midfield in round 4, He's averaging 28 disposals and 92 fantasy points. And I think it's funny, I just talked about Jagger Smith, and it was a similar narrative with Sanders in the last couple of years. Why doesn't Bevo play him on the ball? Why isn't he in the midfield? With these young guys, you've got to ease them into it. And he's probably only in there at the minute because Libba's out and Treloar's still not there. But I think he's made his mark now, and we're going to see him in the midfield for the rest of the year and hopefully for his career. On to Sunday footy, and Essendon took on Freo at Marvel, and I didn't catch any of this game, but it looked like a pretty straightforward procession for the Dockers, who are just absolutely flying, by the way. Essendon, I don't really know. Essendon confused me. I won't go on about it, but Elijah Sardis, I'm not sure why that kid's not playing at the minute. He was named up on the extended list squad and then didn't make the cut on Friday. They preferred Will Setterfield instead, who came in for his first game of the year. But he didn't have any CBAs. He played on the wing, Setters. So scored 86, pretty good. I don't see why you bring him in and not play him in the guts. Anyway, Sullivan Roby played in the guts, and he's starting to impress. He scored 89. This was his second game in a row with more midfield time. And look, if you're going to argue to play Roby over Setterfield on the ball, fine. But I just don't know what they're doing with Sardis. Anyway, for the Dockers, nothing really stood out. Just that there was a very even spread of scoring for them in a game they dominated. But Murphy Reid did stand out. Scored 99. But he collected 30 touches for the first time in his young career, and he just continues to surprise me because I didn't think he was going to break out like this in his second year. But here we are. St Kilda and Richmond was the later game for Sunday, the second last game before the night game. Again, didn't catch any of this one. Looked pretty straightforward. Saints getting the win with Richmond, showing bits at times, but Saints too good. And they had 7 players score a ton. So it's hard to you got to be careful with these results, what you read into, but some interesting ones. Jack McRae put up his first big score in a long time. He really feasted on that young Tiger midfield. He scored a 125. Now, Sam Flanders put up back-to-back tons, so 109 this week. But this week, he did it from half-back. This was his first game as a Saint where he didn't attend a single centre ball up. And as a Flanders owner, I like this because as a mid-only next year, I'm concerned he might just be a 95 guy. 95 to 105, but nothing really too flashy. If he's playing at half-back, that's where he was playing when he put up those ridiculous scores for the Suns at the back end of, I want to say, 2023 maybe? So if he's at half-back, that also means he might get the defender status for next year, which would save him from being mid-only. Anyway, we'll keep an eye on it. Max Hall was definitely in the midfield. This was his second week in a row with plenty of time in the guts, and once again scored very well with a 114. I really rate this guy, Max Hall. He's going to be an absolute fantasy stud, I think, for many years to come. So that was it for St Kilda. For the Tigers, a couple of names. James Trezise, spoke about him at the start. Just a good run of form. And as I said, appeared to benefit from Tom Brown's absence, took 11 marks, scored a 108. And Ben Miller, he took 15 marks on the way to 121. Is that one out of the box? Probably. But he did score 80 last week. So, he's taken a lot of kick-ins, Miller. Interesting to see, but I just wouldn't bank on him, all of a sudden being someone we want sitting in our sides. But who knows? You never know. All right, and then the round finished with West Coast and GWS in Perth on Sunday night footy. Have I told you before how much I love Sunday night footy? I love Sunday night footy. This was a very entertaining game. Great to see the Eagles, who have been a bit disappointing in recent weeks, but they were back to the exciting signs we've seen. A lot of their young guys getting involved, but they're older guys too. It's a good balance they've got at the minute. And none stood out more than Harley Reid. 136 would have to be close to his best ever game in the AFL. 34 touches, 8 tackles, 2 goals, and get this, only 1 free against. Yes, Reid. Much better. Absolutely destroyed it. And, you know, he's so interesting, Reid. That was game 49. He's got his 50th this week. And I think we've all sort of gone in and out of thinking he's going to be, you know, an absolute fantasy jet versus sometimes thinking, he might be more of a super coach guy, not so much an accumulator, more of an impact, brilliant player, but maybe not a huge fantasy star. And it was just nice on the weekend to see a huge score out of him. And yeah, give it a few more years and I think he will be, I reckon he'll have a similar career to sort of like your Dangerfield, Dustin Martin types, where his absolute best fantasy years will be brief, but they will be very high end. And still a few years away from it, but I'm looking forward to seeing it, as I'm sure all West Coast fans are. Now, I also don't think I've ever seen this guy play a better game. Bailey Williams in the ruck with a 141, if you don't mind. That came from 16 touches, 9 tackles, 2 very important goals, and 41 hitouts. Absolutely smashed Kieran Briggs. And, I really don't know what else to say. He did this 3-4 weeks ago. He put up a good score, and then I think I got a little excited and he dropped a 50 the next. So I don't know, but this was super impressive. Best game of his career for sure. The other Eagle I wanted to talk about was Milan Murdoch. Very interesting game he had. A bit of a surprise, but he was given a very tight lockdown role on Lachie Whitfield, which was always going to affect his scoring, or both of them. But Murdoch was on a donut at quarter time, 0. But Whitfield was only on 10, so he was doing his job. As the game went on, Murdoch got more involved, scored 63 and kicked a pretty important goal too in the last. He was really important in the last quarter. But the job he did on Lachie Whitfield, I haven't consumed a lot of stuff yet since the weekend, but I'm hoping people are talking about this. He kept Lachie Whitfield to 2 marks. Now, Whitfield has not had 2 marks, that lower tally in a game, in non-injured games since round 22, 2024. And 59 is what Whitfield's fantasy score was. That's his lowest non-injured score since round 8 of 2024. I don't know who the Eagles have this week. Oh, they got West Coast. I've got Collingwood. Josh Dacos, maybe? Dan Houston? I reckon one of those boys will be in trouble because, Murdoch has just added another feather to his cap. And if we weren't already impressed with this guy's first year, it continues to impress. For the Giants, Kieran Briggs, and I'm pretty hard on Briggsy. I just really thought he was going to become a player, and he may still do so. He scored 89, battled hard in this game, especially after a nasty knee knock he copped in the third quarter, but he persevered. But like I said, Bailey Williams torched him around the ground and even in the hit-outs beat him. And Briggs is only in the side because Nick Madden got injured. Nick Madden got that number 1 spot off him, and I don't think he was letting go. So Briggs has been given a little bit of luck here because Madden's out for, 4 to 5 weeks. This is Briggs' maybe last chance to make it as the number 1 ruck at the Giants. Let's hope he improves because he was okay in this week. Recent games I've watched, he's just been not near it. Harvey Thomas, he's snuck up on me, this guy. He's having a great year. Scored 102, played a great game on the wing with 25 touches and 10 tackles. No marks, 10 tackles, playing on the wing. Very odd, but that just shows he's a pressure guy. Pressure. He's having a great season. And the last guy is Clayton Oliver, who scored 116, and he's really starting to hit his straps in the orange colour. He's nowhere near the glory days of when he was at the D's. But it's really good to see him playing well again. And he had 38 touches on the weekend, and that was his best effort since round 5 2023 when he had 41. And he's actually had a couple of 37 possession games this year as well. Now, very, very big handball to kick ratio, lots of handballs. But yeah, like I said, just great to see him getting lots of the pill and playing pretty well. And that was the last player. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, the things I noticed in round 10, big round, lots of stuff going on, and really interesting time of the year as we approach the mid-season buys. And for me, I started a league this year, a dynasty league, because I'd never played in one. It's always been keepers. And to my understanding, the biggest difference between keeper and dynasty is keeper, you have to delist at least some players. Dynasty, you don't. It's up to you. Now, in this Dynasty League, for the first time ever, I'm playing it without waivers. So the squad that we drafted is the squad we have, and the only way to change that is with trading or the mid-season draft. Never done one before, and it's coming up at the end of round 11. We're going to do one. So, yeah, it's pretty exciting looking at my list, looking at players that I've prepared to give up on and get and drop. And then, some mid-season guys to bring in. It's all quite new to me. I'm very excited. Certainly a different way to play the game. My biggest strength, I think, is my ability to play the waivers and grab players week on week. So it's been a different challenge to draft a side and have to stick to that side for the whole year. And so far I'm doing okay. But yeah, maybe my mid-season draft will help give me a bit of a bump and I can make finals in the first year. All right, what are we doing? I've got a trade that was sent in. I'll jump into that in a minute, but just a reminder, if you are enjoying Finders Keepers, please make sure you've liked, subscribed, and even give me a 5-star review, or even give us a comment on Spotify. A couple of legends did that a few weeks ago. I didn't even know you could comment on Spotify, but you can. So go on, give us some feedback, or don't, up to you. But also find the X page at FindKeepAFL to stay up to date with everything happening with the podcast, and use that to reach out to me if you've got any Keeper League, Dynasty League, Single Season Draft League, any footy questions really. Send them through, and send through any trades you're considering or have received, or a trade that's gone down in your league that you want me to review and analyse on the pod. Send all that stuff through to me because I love it and it's good fun. So on that note, we do have one from a long-time supporter of the podcast, and funnily enough, he's actually in that new Startup Dynasty League I started this year. It's Hawker's Hero. And he's doing pretty good in our first year, sitting in second place, number one for points scored, but he has the oldest list in the league by a country mile. So he really needs to grab a flag in these early years, because it could be a long time till he's back. Anyway, he sent this through from another league he's in, and he sent this a couple of weeks ago, but I obviously didn't do the pod last week, so I'm reading it out now. An 18-team Dynasty League with 38 players per team. Wow, 18 teams, 38 per team. That is huge. I actually thought I'd put the numbers together. So that's 684 players that are listed in this league, And at the point of round one this year, there were 764 AFL players listed. So this league is rostering 90% of the AFL list. I shudder to think what the the free agency pool would look like from week to week. Anyway, let's get to the trade, but that is a gigantic league you're in. The contending team gave up, this was a couple of weeks ago, Josh Rochelle and a first-round pick in exchange for Lachie Neale and a third-round pick. So this is very much your classic going for the now, trying to get the flag, bringing in, Lachie Neale, who's obviously quite old, but scoring really, really well, and gave up Rochelle at an interesting time. He probably had a bit more currency a few weeks ago before he was moved out of that midfield. But for me, I don't know. I'm probably biased with Rochelle, but I think Rochelle in a first-round pick trumps Neale in a third-round pick. Easy. Particularly in a dynasty like that. Because you're going to have Neale for, another year or two most. And Rochelle's just got started and looks like a guy that'll keep forward status for many years, if not his career. So I'd be very happy to do that trade. But I guess at the end of the day, the side that gave up Rochelle brings in Lachie Neale. If they go on and win the flag, they win the trade. It's as simple as that. You win a flag, that's what we're here for. Players for the future are great. Flags are even better. But a great trade. And thanks for chucking it in, Hawker. Love your work, mate. And that'll take us to the end of this week's episode of Finders Keepers. Again, apologies for the slight hiatus last week, but we are back on deck and ready to take on the second half of the year, which is just a couple of weeks away from starting. Can you believe it? So thank you very much for listening. I'll be back next week to dissect round 11 from a keeper and dynasty league perspective. I hope you have a fantastic round of fantasy footy where your loops are lucky, your captains are colossal, and your waivers help you wipe the floor with your opposition. But in the meantime, I'm Jordox, this has been Finders Keepers, and until next time, keep on keeping on.